Hello, everyone, and welcome to the sixth episode in my React for Beginners tutorial series. Now, in this video, we are going to be covering the topic of hooks in React. We've actually already gotten a little bit of an introduction to hooks in the state video, in which we actually did used a hook called useState, which we will be recovering a little bit. Let's go ahead and open this one, for example, the color toggle button. In this class, we pretty much used the useState hook like this. And before I go any further, I'm going to go ahead and explain, like in some level of depth, what hooks are. I am going to be pretty much just giving you the definition React gives you, but with my own slight interpretation. So, of course, useState is generally the first hook that's taught because it's the simplest. I mean, look at it. You just declare a variable, unpack an array, and set useState, and that's how you use it. Of course, the first item in this array is managing the variable itself, and the second one is a setter function that lets you actually update the value, because of course you can't say toggled equals, you have to use set toggled in order to change its value. So that is basically the useState hook. Now, in general, hooks come as a solution to class-based state or class-based methods. Now, before function components were a thing, like these actual functions, components used to have to be classes in JavaScript. Now, the concept of classes and kind of just those type of components are you would declare a JavaScript class, and then in order to use state, you would use a member variable called state inside the class. And then on top of that, you would, in order to basically run functions, you would create member functions inside the class. Well, now, I mean, we're working inside a single function. You can't exactly, update a member variable and expect that variable to persist, over several re-renders. So if the whole thing re-renders, you want the variable to stay the same, that's state, and that's what the useState hook is for. There are two others that we will be going over. There's a ton of them, but there are three core ones. We'll be going over useEffect and useReducer. Now, basically, hooks, like I said, came out as a solution to class-based components for function components. So they allow us to use state, run functions when the component gets rendered, and all that, which previously wasn't possible and only was possible on class components. So, of course, you can start learning. They are pretty nice to use overall. They are generally viewed as cleaner than managing state in class, because I have seen a couple class components in my job as a software engineer, and frankly, the state gets pretty messy when you're only dealing with, like, it can get pretty messy when you're dealing with classes. You could have an object with literally like 20, 30, 40 different items in it, whereas, depending on how you organize your project, if you're using functional components, you may be able to clean that up and make it a lot nicer, a lot easier to debug, and a lot easier to go through. And of course, even with a class component, you can probably do that too. It just really depends on the developer and your coding practices and just, general coding sense and experience. So useState, as we already covered, takes on this syntax here. We declare a variable and we unpack an array. We set it equal to useState, and in here we give it its default value. So of course we are having a toggled variable here, and then we have the setter function as the second array in the unpacking. And then we go useState false because the toggled variable results to false at the beginning. Obviously it's not toggled, and when you click it, it is toggled. That's the kind of use case for this. And then just to kind of demonstrate what this does, I'm gonna go ahead and just cd into here. Let's go ahead and go into a tutorial and write node index or npm run start to actually start up our whole thing here. You will notice I did actually make the web. I'm going to have the Chrome tab be a little bit smaller. That way we can see what we're doing here. And of course, this is the color toggle button. So as you can see, every time we click on it, it toggles its color, goes black and white, then white and black. So that is basically the function of this component here. And that's what it does. Now, say you wanted to, for whatever reason, run some code when the component first renders or when something changes. So for example, let's just say we wanted to alert the user every single time that they click this toggle button. So, there's other ways to do this. In fact, there are certainly better ways to do this, but this is a contrived example to just show how you can use it. And of course, there are real uses. And I'll try to look for some code that uses it. So just to kind of refresh, if you want to alert a user, you just type alert and then say hello world. And if I just save this right now, you'll see as soon as I load our thing, it says hello world here. And then it'll say it 3 times, or it'll say it infinitely. So we're gonna have to go ahead and close that out, um, because every time it re-renders, it re-alerts. So basically, this code is kind of broken, but what we are doing in principle is alerting the user, and we want to do that every time we click on the button. Now, in the name of showing that there are multiple things to do, there are multiple ways to do things. Of course, we can simply do that alert right here on the on click. We could say alert hello world, just like that. And if I reopen our web page, if I click on the toggle, it'll say hello world, then toggle it. Um, and then if it'll do the same here. Notice the color actually doesn't update until we click OK, and the reason for that is state does not update instantaneously. It needs time, and of course, this alert will run instantaneously. Um, so that is one thing to watch out for. Now, if you actually wanted to do this another way for whatever reason, you just want to know how to do things in multiple ways, well, you can import the useEffect hook. Now, you import it very similarly to useState. It's within this import statement from React here. And then, of course, you can actually call it. Now, the way you call useEffect is you just call the function like this, useEffect, and you pass it two different things. First of all, you pass it a function like this, an arrow function, or of course, if you really want, you can write out function. Um, and the second thing you pass to it is called a dependency list, and I'll get to that in a bit. So this is the basic syntax, and of course, this is the code we want to run. So let's go ahead and just type alert hello world. Now you're going to notice here that it's going to immediately start alerting and it will not stop again. We've once again created an infinite loop. Now, useEffect basically is a function that will run whenever you give it certain conditions. And the conditions lie here in this array. Now, notice this array is empty. What that actually ends up meaning, translating to our kind of useEffect language, means that this code will rerun every single re-render of the component. Similarly to if we just didn't have it at all. If we remove the useEffect and we just had alert out here, that's basically what this is doing. But once we actually add something in here, let's just say toggle, which is exactly what we're going to be wanting to do, and I rerun our web page, you'll see that it says hello world, and then I hit OK, and um, I may have done this wrong. Let me quickly just take a look at the documentation. So of course, naturally, I guess I may have made a small mistake in my syntax. Um, right. And actually, yeah, I certainly did make a mistake in my syntax because with an empty array in the dependency list, it really should not be rerunning every time. So let me just look up React use effect. And of course, if you ever run into this on your own, you can look this up just like this using the use effect hook. Use effect, effects without change, effects with classes. Um, let's see. Right. Where's our dependency list? So I'm just looking through the documentation here, and we see use effect. Once again, it's still not using a dependency list yet. There we go. Okay, so only rerun the effect if count changes. So React use effects component did mount. I'm just gonna try to mimic this right now. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and see what's up here. I'm gonna actually just close this again, and instead of alerting, we're just gonna do a console.log. So this is just some quick debugging here, or maybe I'll just keep it with a console.logs to as to not cause any issues. So I'm gonna hit inspect here, and this is actually where I'm gonna go ahead and um, open up our console, which let me switch our window schema to be half and half. So you can get a little bit of a better view of the console. So right here. Oh, as you can see here, we have an invalid DOM property class instead of class name. That was my bad. So that's already our first little infraction here. I made this mistake in the last video, it seems. So there, now that's fixed. And as you can see, there's 3 prints of hello world because there's a little 3 right here. And I will try to make the console a little bit bigger. But as you can see, if I rerun this, you'll see hello world, and then there's a blue 3 to the left, which means it printed 3 times. And every time I click this, it will not change anymore. It'll only stay at 3. Now this right here, actually, my bad, I didn't explain it correctly before. useEffect, giving it an empty array, will only run this once, essentially. You'll see every time I reload, it runs 3 times. The reason for that is this useEffect will run once, and then it will update, it'll rerun every time something inside this array changes. And since there's nothing in this array, it will only run once. Now, if I put toggled on the inside, you'll see how that changes right now. We have 3 runs as previously, but if I click on toggled, now we have 4 runs, and now we have 5 runs. Now we have 6, 7, 8, 9, 7, 8, 9. You can see it started splitting off here. But basically, it reruns every time we toggle this button, or any of our toggle buttons for that matter. And each of them have their own state, of course, but this does rerun every time we toggle a button. Now, of course, if we wanted to that's why I'm thinking if we wanted to alert the user, it shouldn't be complaining here. If I retry this, so it says hello world. Oh, okay, my bad. So actually, yeah, so this is working as intended. Every time I do this, I click hello world, it says it again 3 times because we have 3 toggle buttons. I will actually go ahead and remove our current, um, I'm going to go ahead and remove 2 of them. That way we can just get a smoother experience. So you can see there's 3 toggle buttons here. I'm going to go ahead and remove them like that. And now we only have a single toggle button. So you'll see I reload and it says hello world, and I hit OK and it's done. Now, once I click on the button again, it just says hello world again. So of course, this is just another way. And notice one cool thing is the button actually changes its color half the time. It's a little inconsistent. Um, So, that is another drawback of this method. But of course, this is not the only use. What if, for example, this increment button, every time we increment, or trying to think here, maybe every time this increment changes, then we may want to do something. And if this use effect, of course, for example, is checking to change the text box's color, maybe not only when the increment changes, but when, for example, when we click on this toggle button, or like when we click on a different part of the component, it changes some other, it also changes the color. Basically, this use effect is a way to aggregate functionality inside of a component based on some variables. And of course, I'm trying to come up with a good example of this. So, you know what, as I sometimes do, I'm going to go ahead and go to my GitHub and see if I can find anything. Because of course, I always want to provide somewhat useful examples. So I'm going to come here to my GitHub repository. This is my website, which is written in React, which is the reason why I'm coming here. And I'm just going to do a search for use effect because I'm curious where I'm using effect in this repository. Okay, so let's see. Okay, source.page not found. So this is a page in my website where that will run whenever we have not found my page. And I'm going to go ahead and sign in here. Um, let's see, GHU, and then I think that's my password. And you'll see that I just demonstrated a little bit of my snippet manager where I have this whole thing like where I can type in a keybind like that and hit space. I made a little YouTube mini series on that if you're interested. It's called the Snippet Manager Tutorial Series, where you can make that for yourself. And then, of course, so we have this page not found file right here. it's responsible for whenever we go to a page that's not on my website. So if I go to matthewlin.net/dev, both of them work, slash blah, 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 it'll take me here, say 404 page not found. Don't worry, I'll redirect you back in 3 seconds, blah, blah, blah. And then it goes back to the home page. So basically, this is a very simple component, but it has a use effect in it. This use effect will basically run whenever the seconds left changes. This is the main change here. And all it'll do is it will do a check right here for if the seconds left is 1 or less than 1, because you'll see there's a little seconds counter here. And that's a little bug. But again, if I just come here, it'll have this 3, 2, 1. So it's just taking care of this counter functionality here. Basically, we are setting seconds left to the previous value. And then if the seconds left is less than 1, then of course we just push them to the home page, is basically what this code is doing. It's pretty simple. Now, I'm not 100% sure if this is the best way to implement this, but it's the way I decided to implement it. And of course, as I demonstrated at the beginning, there are multiple ways to implement the same logic. So it's up to you. This approach made the most sense to me. And I'm pretty sure, once explained, it makes the most sense, or, it makes a decent amount of sense for most people in this kind of context here. So that's what I'm using useEffect for. I'm using it to take care of a single number, a counter number, and it updates that counter number. This useEffect runs every time that the seconds left variable updates, and its job is to update it again in a second until there's 1 second left, and then it actually changes the state of the website. So all of that functionality is just right here in this useEffect. The majority of it is in here. And the rest of the functionality here is just a couple states and then some context and history. These are other hooks. Some of them are custom hooks, like with React Router, another library, and of course, so we're not going to get too advanced here. But that is the use of useEffect on my website, for example. And there are an infinite number of uses. Now, we are already at 17 minutes. I probably went on for a little bit too long, but we are going to quickly cover useReducer. Now, basically, useState has always, in my experience, been taught as the first hook. It basically allows you to use some state. But useReducer is another built-in hook that basically allows you to use a function to determine the variable of state. Now, it's a little weird the way it works, but I'm going to go ahead and just reducer here. Basically, useReducer is pretty much very similar to the way useState is structured. You can see this whole array unpacking, and then you use reducer, blah, blah, blah. But you actually give it a function called a reducer. And what it takes is it takes in the current state and it takes an action. And basically, based on that action, it will update the state, which is pretty cool. So for example, the way to convert, and I'm going to change back to our original layout here so we can have more code room. The way to convert to that whole system, rather than using useState here, we can use the useReducer function. Now this is of course very overkill, but we're going to use it for, once again, a contrived example. But there are other examples that will work, but for now, we're just going to use useReducer like this. So should be here somewhere. There we go. Okay, so basically for useReducer, we need to import it first, just like this, and we will remove useState and use reducer instead. And then with this, you give it a reducer function, initial arg, and init. Now, basically, if we come here to the actual use, the initial state, the initial arg is the actual initial state that we want to give our function. And then we don't have to init it to anything. So just to take a look here, let's declare another function, const the reducer, and we'll just set it equal to another function. So this will be our reducer function here. It'll take, of course, the previous state and an action. And what we can do is we can switch the action dot, just like we're doing here in the docs. Of course, now we can say case on makes, we can say state dot, so toggled will be part of the state. Toggled is equal to, um, or actually, you know what? We could say state is equal to, I'm actually not sure. I'm just going to say state dot toggled is equal to true. And then we'll say case off state.toggled is equal to false. Expected a default case. So let me just finish this, and then we can just say default. There's something wrong if we're defaulting, so we'll just do an empty default here. And then useState is not defined. We're still using useState up here. We'll change that to useReducer, and then we will pass it in this reducer as the first function. And then, of course, we will give it the initial state, which will just be toggled as false. So you'll see the initial state is an object with the toggled key set to false. And then, of course, we need to change the state. We need to change this a little bit. Um, in fact, you know what, why don't we just say state is equal to true? I don't know if this is the correct way to use useReducer because I don't use it that often, or I don't really use it much at all. But I know it is very recommended to use it in a lot of cases. There are different cases where useState is better. There are cases where useReducer is better. So of course, I got to teach both, and they're both very common in the actual production environment. So you have toggled, set toggled. This needs to change a little bit. Let me just figure out how. Okay, so you know what? We'll keep this naming, even though it should be like state and dispatch. Just notice this. I'm going to keep this for the sake of our example. It doesn't really work great with useReducer because this is literally a toggle variable, which useState would definitely work better for this very simple example. But instead of setting toggle to not toggle, we will say, yeah, this is actually going to really be more complicated. But basically, the state, we need to give it an action. Um, Hold on. Yeah, never mind. So we just return true and return false. So if it's on, if we're toggling it off, return false. It's on, return true, and we can actually just change the state to an underscore since we're not using it. And then set toggled. So here in our toggled, we give it an action. And then, yeah, this is definitely a little bit weird, but we'll say toggled. If it's already toggled, then we will turn it off. But if it's not toggled, we'll turn it on, if that makes sense. So this is a turn area right here. So this action will be deduced at runtime to either be off or on. And really, this is not the great, I don't think this is a great way to implement, but of course, this is the way we're implementing it right now. So you'll see the way, unless it broke, which it very much might have. So I'll just go ahead and remove these breaks here. So we have toggled starts off at false. We have this reducer function, which returns true or false based on the action. And of course, we say action.type, my bad, like that. And you can see now we have our functionality back. Whenever we click on the button, it changes its color. And the stupid thing, I'm going to go ahead and remove the alert and we'll just have the console.log. So I reload it once again. And of course, we click on it to toggle. And basically what's happening here is instead of actually changing a variable, we are running it through this reducer function. Now, this is very useful for when we have a million different cases. And of course, instead of using a string, you might want to use an enum, which in JavaScript would be an object.freeze. And I'm not going to go into that because we don't have the time. We're already at 24 minutes. But basically, that is the gist of hooks in general. And using hooks and use state, useReducer, and useEffect basically in React. So if you want to see more videos like this, I recommend you check out the playlist, which is linked in the description. I'm uploading every 2 days. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for notifications whenever I post new videos. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.